Good morning.
Good
morning.
Welcome to Forums That Matter, a community service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland. I'm Ed Covington, a member of the Forum Committee and the coordinator of this morning's discussion. It has both remote and in-person audiences. Our topic today is the divided states of America. We'll have Q&A after the talk. Please hold your questions until then, at which time microphones will be passed to the in-person audience. Members of the virtual audience can put questions into the Q&A box. Also, they can enable closed captioning by pushing the button at the bottom of their screen. Please be sure your phones are silenced. The program is being recorded and it will be available in a few days on our website at uucleveland.org. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mayor Earl Leiken, who is a senior fellow of the Leiken College of Public Affairs and Education at Case, and a lecturer at the Siegal College of Lifetime Learning at Case. He's also the former mayor of Cleveland Heights. Yay! Shaker Heights, I mean.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today.
I want to thank the church and those responsible for the program for the opportunity to speak today. I did have an opportunity to participate as a panelist while I was mayor in this series. And it's a very distinguished series, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate all those who came out in this bitter cold weather to be here today. What we're going to talk about is the divided state of our country and why we've been driven so far apart. And then hopefully we can spend some time. I can give you my ideas. I'd like to have yours on how we can pull back together. And when we talk about how we've drifted apart, the psychologists tell us to start with psychology and try to understand who we really are and what factors there are in our fundamental makeup that cause us to separate from one another. A good resource I found is a book written by a man named Jonathan Haidt, who talks about the righteous mind. And he says intuition controls political views. And what he means by intuition is something that we tend to know from our instinctive feelings rather than considered reasoning. And really, intuition, as we evolved, was a very positive thing, because as we faced threats, we were able to react quickly without the need to think everything through and to experience all the delay that would involve. But when we talk about ideas in a political context, it creates some problems. As Haidt says, intuition comes first in our political feelings and our moral feelings. Strategic reasoning comes second. So what that means is we use our reasoning to support our intuitions rather than the other way around. And at the level of our intuitions, we have a feeling of righteousness about our feelings. As Haidt says, this is a feature of our evolutionary design. It's not something that's a bug or that otherwise would have caused us to be rational. It comes from how we developed. So reason supports intuition. We tend to use our reason to support our basic feelings, particularly about things like political issues or moral issues. The analogy Haidt uses in the book is the analogy of a presidential press secretary. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard, I think her name is Caroline Levitt, but you can see that every single thing she says is used to justify what the president has done or what the president thinks.
Right.
Well, Haidt explains this is how our mind tends to work. Everything we argue, everything we say through our reason tends to justify how we feel rather than the other way around. Haidt conducted experiments with students that showed how inflexible they were. And there's a certain rigidity about these basic intuitions and feelings that make it difficult to achieve compromise. Examples, well, on the right, despite facts to the contrary, people will believe certain things. Obama was born in Kenya. The Haitians in Springfield eat people's pets. Trump won the 2020 election. Refusing to accept facts that contradict what they believe based on their instincts or intuition. On the left, that you can't talk to any Trump voters because they're all too emotional or stupid. Absolutely untrue. That capitalism is inherently evil, only socialism works. Or this is kind of historic, the Bolshevik Revolution, many people on the far left in the country at one time said led to a just and desirable outcome. Well, we know that wasn't true with the Stalinist purges and all the things that happened. So people will cling firmly to their intuitions, and this tends to divide us because the people, of course, have different intuitions and different instincts. Guess we got it working. Republicans and Democrats tend to have different intuitions and moral, what Haidt calls moral receptors on issues like fairness, compassion, authority, sanctity. Democrats tend to, when they think about fairness, they tend to think about the underdog, the underprivileged. Republicans tend more to think about the individual and whether an individual is being treated and whether people are taking advantage of that individual. On issues like compassion, the Democrats feel very strongly about compassion. Republicans less so, but they feel very strongly about authority and sanctity. Now, these are generalizations, but across a broad spectrum of people in both parties, these are the differences. Now, in addition to this issue with instinctive feelings prevailing over reason, we are also inherently tribal. And what that means, what that's based on, of course, is again how we evolved. People had a shared intentionality that allowed them to gather together, to raise food, to work cooperatively, to protect the community from raids from other tribes and to raid other tribes. And this enormously improved their effectiveness. And that's still with us, but it isn't necessarily always a good thing today. Characteristics of tribalism are an intense loyalty to a tribe and an indifference or intolerance or hostility to other tribes. And modern examples, well, college football, professional football. You see people going crazy, supporting their own team. The players may wear the colors of the college, but they have no loyalty to the college. They go into the portal, they go to which team every year seems to benefit them the most. And the same thing in professional sports, professional football. So that's one example, modern example of tribalism. Our political parties are also an example of tribalism, where people are so committed to their own political party that they will not even consider the views or feelings of others who belong to a different political party. And this does have a racial component. Jennifer Eberhardt, who is a Black psychologist, professor at University of Stanford, wrote a book called Bias. And she described her own experience in the book. And Jennifer lived in the city of Cleveland for many years, and most of the people she came in contact with were Black. And she went through the Cleveland schools, and again, most of the children she dealt with were Black. And then her family moved to Beechwood. And she said the students were very nice to her, but she had a real problem. She said, I couldn't tell one from another. They all looked alike. And she goes on to say that this cringeworthy expression, they all look alike, has been considered the province of the bigot. But it's actually a function of biology and exposure. Our brains are better at processing faces that evoke a sense of familiarity. And this quote is from a Yale law professor who says that, talks about the fact that at one point, whites dominated the country politically, economically, culturally, and that's no longer the case. And so we have competition among different racial groups and ethnic groups. And that can result in a zero-sum problem with political tribalism. Now, what we're seeing today, I think is pretty clearly with all the deportations, an effort to get back to a dominant white and probably Christian country, and it's an enormous problem and a tremendously divisive. But if the psychological factors, the fact that people act on the basis of their intuitions and instincts, and the fact that we tend to be tribal weren't enough, today we're facing a whole slew of environmental factors that drive us apart. Beginning with geography. A man named Richard Florida wrote a book called The New Urban Crisis. He's an urbanist. And he said, what we have today is places that were at one time centers of manufacturing, vibrant cities and towns in the Midwest. We have many of them in Ohio that lost their manufacturing base, that lost a lot of their population, where the people feel they are really suffering. And by contrast, we have these mega cities that have focused on technology, places like Boston and San Francisco, that are just doing wonderfully economically. And it's tremendously divisive, and it's created a lot of problems. We also have a big distinction between rural areas and urban areas. Ezra Klein points out in his book why we're so polarized, that there is no major metropolitan area in the country that has voted Republican, and there's no rural area that really has voted Democratic. As Ezra Klein says, we are fixed in place. The sorting continues far below the state level. At one point, most people did not live in landslide counties where the presidential candidate got more than 60% of the vote, but today most people do. And we do sort ourselves out. I live in Shaker Heights because I like the values of the people who live in Shaker Heights, but I would be happy in a small town in Mississippi. So we've actually sorted ourselves out based on how people feel about the politics and other issues, and whether they feel like we do. Education has also been a dividing factor. And we see that in the results of the 2024 presidential election. And you see that people with postgraduate degrees or education voted 2-to-1 for Kamala Harris. And it's almost the reverse for people with a high school degree or less. They voted close to the same way for Trump. Now, in addition to all of this, we've got the division caused by wealth and income. And at one time in this country, and you can see it on the graph, all income groups rose by the same percentage. The wealthy, the middle class, the poor. That was very true in the post-World War II years, where we experienced an economic boom that supported all income classes. But that hasn't been the case since the late 1970s. And the differences in growth in income and wealth for those at the top have been very dramatic as compared to those in the middle and those at the bottom, which causes a lot of resentment and frustration. And this, oh, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way here. This is an illustration of that. Even after taxes and government transfers, even after, with a tax code that's somewhat progressive, but not nearly as much as it was, the upper 1% have 13% of the income, 13 times as much as they would have if you just looked at their percentage in the population. The next 19% has 34% of the income. So the top 20% has 47% of the income in the country. The middle 60% has only 46%, and the bottom 20% is left with 8%. And it's even more extreme when it comes to wealth. The wealth of the top 1% is 35 times what it would be if you just looked at their percentage in the population, 35% of the wealth in the country. If you look at the next 9%, it's 38%. So 73% of the wealth in the country is owned by the upper 20% of the population, and the bottom 9%, 90%, excuse me, the top 10%. There's 73% of the wealth, and the bottom 90% has only 27%. This is a quote from Justice Brandeis. He says, we can have democracy in this country, or we can have extreme wealth concentrated in the hands of the few, but we cannot have both. Now, there's also the divisive factor of the media. At one time, we relied on major networks and newspapers for our news, and they gave only a certain percentage of their space or their time to political issues. And they also tried to present the issues in a balanced way. Well, today, people often turn for their news to media vehicles that support their political positions, whether it's MSNBC, now MS Now, for the left, or Fox News for the right. And the result of that is that their differences are reinforced. And it's in the interest of these networks to keep doing that because it increases their viewership. And so they'll often pick out figures that arouse the greatest anger on one side or the other. On the left, it's probably Trump. You hear, if you turn on MS Now, it's Trump, 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 Trump. If you turn on Fox News, which I don't watch, but it's probably Ilhan. They say it's Ilhan Omar, a figure like that from the far left. That makes people especially angry. Political parties. This is a quote from Ezra Klein's book, Why We Are So Polarized. We're so locked in today to our political identification that there is no candidate, no information, no condition that can force us to change our minds. We will justify almost anything or anyone so long as it helps their side, and the result is a politics devoid of guardrails, standards, persuasion, accountability. Now, leadership. We have leadership that is fueling division rather than seeking to bring us together. This is a quote from Alexander Hamilton, who anticipated this problem in 1789. He said, when a man, unprincipled in private life, bold in his temper, despotic in his demeanor, mounts the hobby horse of popularity, takes every opportunity of embarrassing the government, bringing it under suspicion, flatters and falls in with the zealots of the day, it can be suspected that his object is to throw things into confusion, that he may ride the storm and direct the whirlwind. So I'll let you guess as to who that might apply to. So let me give you some of my ideas on how to overcome our division, and then we want to hear from all of you as to what you think. Certainly, communication. Really recognizing that there are people on both sides who have points of view, and that it is helpful to talk with them and understand their point of views and express their own. This book was called to my attention at a college reunion. It's written by Diane Hessen, and it says Our Common Ground. And she said that when she went around and talked to individuals and groups of people throughout the country, she found that there was remarkable common ground. She said, for instance, on immigration, which seems to be such a divisive issue, that 80% of the people that she talked to felt the same way about it. They wanted to protect the borders. They wanted people who were immigrants who had a criminal record and who were illegal to be removed from the country. But they didn't favor massive deportations. And they certainly didn't favor the kind of thing that's going on now with ICE. And that there was a lot of common ground. And she said that's so true of many other issues once you get people together. What Jonathan Haidt says is, let's go back to Dale Carnegie. Now, I'm old enough to remember Dale Carnegie. I'm sure not everybody here is, but Dale Carnegie wrote a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And Haidt says, let's approach people with a different point of view in a warm and friendly way. And he said, and if you do that and you talk to them and talk things out, you can even change their intuitions. It is possible. Education. Education is such an important factor in helping people to really understand that what appear to be differences between us aren't as important, but also helping people to understand our political process and the importance of our democracy. The Democrats tried to use democracy in the presidential campaign, and it didn't go over well. People weren't that interested in it. And I bemoan the fact that we don't seem to have compulsory civics courses in our educational system like we did way back when I was in school, because I think those are so important for people to be educated, not just to find a job in the workplace, but to be good citizens and to participate in our democracy. And the more education you can give people, the better. Compulsory national service. Now, this may be a somewhat controversial idea. Doesn't mean at all that everybody has to go into the military. We've had programs in the past like the Peace Corps and VISTA. The Peace Corps dealing with countries, service to countries, other countries, VISTA dealing with service here in the United States. And the benefit of that is it brings young people together who are different, who are from different parts of the country, brings people together of different races, and you see and learn how much we all have in common. But I think it's going to take more than all that. I think it's going to take the problem of creating a fairer society. Because a lot of our problem, I think, is anger. And anger exists on the left and on the right. And if you watch Bernie Sanders speak or Elizabeth Warren speak, you see a lot of anger. But the same thing's true on the right. You see enormous anger in the MAGA movement. And I think a lot of it comes from the fact that people feel that they aren't being treated fairly in many respects. And I'll just go quickly through the list. Progressive taxes. We've backed away from the notion that taxes should be more progressive, which has had a lot to do with those huge divisions in wealth and income. And I think it's unfortunate because I think it's something that creates the feeling among people that things are less fair than they should be. And I also think it creates the problem of I also think we need the money. Child care, so people can go to work. Multicultural society. My wife Ellen and I took our granddaughter, 8-year-old granddaughter, out to dinner a number of years ago. And as we left the restaurant, she said she had to go to the bathroom. And she said, "Is your house closer or is mine?" And I said, "Well, we just left the restaurant. Let's just, that's much closer." And she said, "No, you can't go back to the past." Well, what this whole effort, these extreme deportations is about, is trying to go back to the past, trying to go back to a time when the United States was dominated by white people, was dominated by people of the Protestant faith, and to get the people who are changing that out of here. I think that's very clear from the receptiveness to bringing white people in from South Africa, if you've seen that in the news. So we're going to have a multicultural society. We can't go back to the past. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. I mean, we are celebrating Martin Luther King Day tomorrow. It's time for us to wake up and realize that multiculturalism is a good thing, and it's the present and the future, and that's the kind of country we're going to have, and stop all this racial and ethnic hatred. Housing policy and mobility. I saw Walter Isaacson on television the other day, and he was saying, another author, he was saying that one of the big problems we have in this country today is that it used to be that when you were 30 years old, you had enough money to buy a house and to get married and to have children. And he said that isn't the case anymore. The majority of people who are buying houses are in their 40s. And he said it can't be that we continue along those lines. So we have had situations where we've had a GI Bill where we used resources to allow for a lot more construction, allow for a much more, a stronger home market in terms of supply, and that would bring prices down and allow young people to fulfill the American dream as we have. Job training for the displaced. A lot of people were displaced by technology and globalization program, but there are going to be new jobs in the future. The University of Michigan just started a program for training of people in AI, and that's going to be a very valuable skill. So don't we have a responsibility to train people for positions in the future so people won't be so frustrated that they can't find work? Assurance of healthcare for all, I think there's a way to do that. And support for redevelopment in some of these communities that have fallen so far behind. It's going to take more revenue to do this, but I think certainly the tax code being more progressive can help to produce that. And frankly, this is a little controversial. I think it would be better for us all to be paying a little more in taxes in order to have a fairer society. So let's stop there and take your ideas as to what you think should be done to bring us together. Welcome your comments and any other questions you have or thoughts you have about any of this.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us this morning. We're now going to start with Q&A. The in-person audience, you'll have microphones available. The folks at home can use the Q&A button at the bottom of their screen. And
hi, good morning. Thank you so much for the presentation. I really appreciate it. I have actually partially read The Righteous Mind and partially read Ezra Klein's book.
Good.
I actually just also finished Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which was really, really, I highly recommend. But so I have one comment and one question for you and for the general audience. One, it was so interesting when you have the compulsory national service. I was literally just 2 days ago at a book club meeting, and this woman who has a master's in international studies and military told me that her master's thesis was for compulsory draft. Because it as a way to constrain foreign policy, which I had never heard that. And initially, I have 3 sons between the age of 20 and 18, so I don't know if I can get fully on board with that. But I thought it was really interesting. So I just,
that's very
it's very interesting. Then the other thing, the question that I had, the Common Good book that you showed, it reminds me that I keep seeing on my Facebook feed groups that are talking about bringing them together. I think one's called Builders or something like that. And I remember Kamala Harris in her, she ran on, we have more in common than we have different, which I totally agree with. So I was just wondering if anybody has had any involvement or knows of any of these groups, because I do think that is a real potential to get people aligned. Because as you mentioned, I don't think anybody is on board with shooting women point blank in the street, So yeah, I'm just curious if anybody has any experience or things to share.
Yes, now these groups do appear on television from time to time. I've seen them on PBS specifically, but I'm not aware of any local groups that of that type that try to bring people together from different points of view. Is anybody aware of that?
Braver Angels.
Braver Angel.
Braver Angels?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. My question is, going back to the very core of how people get started with their feelings and motivations politically, and where we are, the divisions. You said that it goes back to that we start with an what did you say, an intuition. So what's the explanation for families where one person is, for my family, my older sister, Crumper, my other sister and I, definitely not. What explains that when you grew up in the same family, same environment, and yet you're so divided?
Well, I have two brothers, and Ellen often says to me, how could this be that you have three brothers, all from the same parents, raised in the same household, so different and with such different points of view. So it isn't just a factor of environment. Our heredity is very mixed. And sometimes it comes out one way, and sometimes it comes out another.
Yeah.
And sometimes it favors one parent, and sometimes it favors the other. And so that's about the best explanation I can come up with. But my own experience is that siblings can be very, very different.
Good morning. Thank you for being here, and I'm ready to vote for you. I love your
One again.
and
I've run 7 times, so I've got enough. Yeah.
but I'm ready again. Anyway, so the things that you suggest seem so compatible to my way of thinking about what would help create a healthier and more compassionate society. Clearly, people have been trying to do that. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, all these folks have been trying, and there's whatever against that, other than just voicing our support for these things. How can we create momentum to help these things come to pass?
Well, how can we create momentum? On an individual basis, we could start doing things. We can reach out, those of us who are on the other side, to people we know who've voted for Trump and say, let's get together and let's talk. Now, it's not easy because there's a lot of suspicions on both sides. But we can try to do that. We can try to form groups on an individual basis. But also, we can campaign for and work for candidates who will support the kinds of things we've been talking about. And I would personally look for those candidates who do have the capacity to bring us together. I mean, we have had presidents in the past who had the ability to do that. I think of the first president I was aware of as a young person, which was President Eisenhower. Now, my family did not support him. They voted Democratic, but he had the respect of people in the country. And Mr. President really meant something. You looked up to the figure who was serving in that capacity. And I think we need to find people who are like that to serve in our political positions. If one thing leadership should have is respect. We should have people regardless of their particular party, who earn and deserve the respect of people in the public. And if you don't have that, you've got a real problem. So I think there's a political agenda that's very important.
Thank you for a thought-provoking presentation, and sort of following up on Lori's question. I mean, what you presented is not surprisingly a progressive agenda. And so those on the right might say, well, that's the Democrats and so on. And yet you also say there's all this common ground, which I agree with, and but fundamentally that's what a lot of people want. My question really is about, you didn't say much about money in politics and how that, in my mind, skews what people really want by having that upper part, or those who have the money, controlling the agenda, which is to keep wealth rather than for the common good. So not an easy question, but how do we work with both this need to bring people together, but also to not be taken in by what supports political candidates, the money?
No, you're absolutely right, Nancy. That is a major omission. Money in politics, I think, is a huge problem because it clearly buys influence. And we have had a problem, frankly, in my opinion, with the Supreme Court. Because we have had, even before some of the more recent decisions, which many of us think are wrong, we have had a court that refused to accept legislation that was passed by Congress supporting restrictions on campaign donations. This whole argument that giving money to get influence is free speech, I think, is very troubling. I think the court got off on the wrong track when it equated money with speech. I do think that is a major problem and something that, all we can do is try to correct it by trying to elect candidates who will recognize the importance of limitations on political contributions and argue for it. But it's a tough situation because of these court decisions that have really cut back on legislation that was already passed.
The support for your argument there is the Gillians and Page study. They looked at 1,700 pieces of legislation, and they decided, who benefits from each of these. And the legislation went over 30 years, and 98% of the time, it helped the wealthy. And that wealth you mentioned is going to be worse than income. We're going to keep passing that on. So the problem we're talking about is going to get worse and worse and worse.
Right.
You talked about intuition originally. I think that the problems have changed. When we developed that intuition, the problems were immediate, specific, and required an individual response. A lion roared, you had to act.
Sure.
The problems today are long picture, long term, and they require a collective response. So individuals are not facing the same problems today that they faced before.
Absolutely.
And you didn't say anything about social media and its effect on. The other question I have is I see a division between secularism and spiritualism. I see it in this country and I see it in the Arab world. And I wonder what function that plays on the divisions we have.
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to remember all the comments. They're all valid. Well, as far as secular, we are divided by religion. That's true. If you look at the outcome of the election, more observant people tended to vote more Republican, less observant tended to vote more Democratic. You raised a point about it. Just remind me of the other 2 points you raised.
Social media.
Social media has played a major factor as well. That's true. That does fuel division, for the most part. And then you mentioned one other.
The changes in.
Oh, yes. That's a very important point. A lot of what we need to do, I think, is to overcome these issues of how we're constructed and how we're developed. For instance, when it comes to intuition, a good example of that, as Jennifer Eberhardt pointed out, is this affinity we have for people who look like us. And what she does is do a lot of training of police. So police aren't reacting defensively when they see, white police aren't reacting defensively when they see black people or a black motorist. And what she does is anti-race training. And they call it anti-race training, so that we are more receptive to people who are different from us. That's a great value of education. So we do, you're right. The instincts that we've developed through the evolutionary process, when we're at a whole different point, tribalism and the tendency to react based on our instincts and our intuitions, don't necessarily work today. We need to overcome them. And that's one of the things that I hope we can do through some of the thoughts I expressed and some of the thoughts you all have expressed. There's a couple of people over here.
There are a few online questions that I want to get to. One is, what is the role of political party primaries in polarizing our public debate? And how might we reform them in Ohio?
Well, that's a very good question. In 1968, at that point, all nominations were not really determined by primaries, so that the nominee had actually been determined by the time of the party convention. The delegates had a role in selecting the candidates and using their independent judgments. There were some primaries, there were other states that didn't necessarily have them. The parties acted as gatekeepers to make sure, and the delegates, to make sure that the candidates who were selected were candidates who were successful and probably more traditional, and probably candidates who had a significant background in government. In 1968, there was an uproar at the Democratic Convention and arguments that wasn't democratic enough, and the Democratic Party changed to an all-primary system. So the candidate was determined solely by the results of primaries. The Republicans followed. And so today, when you're running in a Republican primary, you only have to appeal to Republicans. And in a Democratic Party race, you only have to appeal to Democrats. The tendency is to be concerned more about, in many instances, about being out-primaried by somebody farther to the right or somebody farther to the left than it is with trying to find highly qualified candidates who can best serve all the American people. So I believe Klein discusses that in his book. I've seen it elsewhere, that going to an all-primary system has probably increased divisiveness. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Thank you for your talk this morning. Very informative. I'd like to address what you asked earlier. Intuition, philosophy would not put intuition first. What I'm missing from some of the references you've made is to morality and any kind of a commitment to where we might find truth. I think that during the Enlightenment, Nietzsche and some others did a grave error to us in sort of supporting the idea of moral relativism, cultural relativism. So I would just, if you're interested in finding another way to think about some of these political, historical issues, I would refer you to Plato.
Well, I do want to add to that, the issue of like common ground assumes that we all want the same thing. And I think that common ground, we may have ideas about the same thing, but our society is divided into people who want power and people who don't want power. I don't want power, I want democracy. But there's other people who want to be in charge. The other thing is that man who spoke on City Club was he's an evangelical Christian. So everything he's doing is aimed at furthering his evangelical beliefs, including converting Muslims to Christianity. That's his kind of success. So our ways of getting power are not the same thing. So as a liberal and progressive, I may have all these wonderful thoughts of common ground, but it doesn't really appeal to this other side who has other reasons for doing what they're doing. They view the people as wolves or sheep. They view them as righteous or sinners. Does that make sense? And I don't know how common sense and logic can address those people.
Could I, if you don't mind? One of the things that doesn't ever get addressed is the difference in what male and female may want. We associate power with the masculine, when in fact, we never hit what women strive for, what women are inspired to try and achieve. And then when we get into a man's world, they expect us to be like them.
Well, as a gender, we're not generally in charge of the world. So it's these other people that are calling.
Well, that gets to the whole problem in many ways. Oh God, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Just a couple of quick comments. With respect to the issue of morality, I would say two things. One is we do have moral instincts. For instance, he feels, many people have an instinct about compassion and caring for other people. So that is part of it. But he's also not saying how we should be. He's saying how we started and where we are, where we began, and what we need to overcome. And as far as philosophy is concerned, I don't think he or other psychologists would reject the value of psychology. It's philosophy, if philosophy is pointing us in a better direction.
Well, the only reason I raised that is because maybe we're not just instinctual creatures. Maybe it's not just about survival. Maybe there's some other aspect to us.
No, and I just want to make clear that these issues about tribalism and instinct and intuition are how we started. They're not where we should be. We can overcome them through reason if we approach it the right way. We are human and we are capable of overcoming that. One of the things I learned from being a mayor was we were able to overcome a major financial crisis and get to a AAA bond rating. We were able to build the Van Aken Center. We were able to create that whole Van Aken Center that we have today. We were able to restore a major neighborhood that was in decline that's now selling houses for $300,000. Jan Devereaux is on council as part of that. And I saw people working together who had different points of view and came from different backgrounds, from different races, different religions. I know we can overcome these instincts and tribal feelings we have, but we have to work on it. We have to be mindful of it.
Thank you so much. I think none of you will be surprised that in our pre-meeting conversations, the mayor and I discussed how could he turn his, was it an 8-hour course into a 30-minute lecture? We need another 7.5 hours, I think. Yeah, a lot of wisdom there. Thanks so much. Our next forum is going to be on February 1st, and it will address the property tax debate in Ohio. We don't know what that is in Shaker. If you'd like to receive weekly reminders of our forums, fill out the form on the clipboard at the back table. You're invited to attend our 10:15 Sunday service either upstairs in the sanctuary or via YouTube. It will be conducted by Mark Weber, whose message is entitled Neither Victims Nor Executioners. It's a good follow-on. Drawing on the moral vision of Albert Camus, the service reflects on what it means to seek peace, dignity, and shared humanity in a world shaped by conflict. We will explore how ordinary people can resist injustice without surrendering compassion, and how hope can be sustained even in difficult times. To see what else is happening in our conversation, check out our website at uucleveland.org. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great week.